And we're on. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Jason.
Welcome to the Linsider.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
Thank you for coming on my podcast. And as you know, the podcast I'm discussing the entertainment industry from a cross-cultural and interdisciplinary perspective. You and I know each other going back, I want to say it is over 20 years. I want to
Yes.
say it was like I want to say this was like in 2000.
Yeah, it
Or maybe
was.
1999,
Maybe
maybe
1999.
when I
Yeah.
when I met you.
hmm
And how we met is I applied for this job at BMG
hmm
as a college music intern, and I interviewed with you, and it was my first job in entertainment. It might have even been one of my first interviews in
Really?
entertainment. Might have
Wow.
been.
Might have been.
I mean, I've interviewed at other places, but not
hmm
specifically in entertainment and in
hmm
music.
hmm
And music is really my first love.
Yes.
I tell people, I say that a lot. It's just I work in film, but I mean, it's for
hmm
me, it's all connected. It's this thing that I refer to as pop culture, right?
Yeah, totally.
Um, and so, first of all, I want to acknowledge you for giving me that opportunity um, to be in the music world while I was in college and interning, because that was very life changing. Just to go off like on a little bit, like I remember
hmm
I got the I got the job, and
hmm
then very soon after it was like going to New York
Yeah, right. hmm
for CMJ.
hmm
And first of all, it's like I've never really been to New York in that way. Like, I
Right.
guess you could say I've been in New York before, but not on a work trip. And then,
hmm
especially not on a trip where like the job was like to go and listen to bands
Right. Right. Super fun.
and to hang out with it was like a motley crew of
hmm
folks from all around the world.
Yeah.
And it was just a little bit unbelievable because it's like what is this? And it's things that you read about, because I remember going into like the different record label offices and all this cuss, and it was just really amazing. So um I want to take that moment to
Oh,
acknowledge
thank you.
you for that opportunity. Thank you. It was really amazing, and I would say very life transforming to have that experience.
Well, I appreciate you so much, Jason. And I remember that interview. And um, I think, in the order of things, you were maybe the last person we were talking to that day.
Hmm.
And which was fortunate because as soon as you left, I was like, oh, he's the guy for the job. It was awesome. And that experience that you just recounted was the same experience I had being in
Mm.
your shoes at that time as a college intern wanting the job and not really understanding until we went on a huge work trip the
Mm.
scope of everything and what we
Mhm.
were engaging in and how we were engaging with the different labels and the artists and being having a voice in that arena because we were allowed to share our experiences with music, talk about how much we loved the artists we loved, even working artists that we wouldn't ordinarily gravitate to because the genres were different or the sound was different for what we loved, and having a system to contain all of that stuff and let you play around with art as music
Mhm.
and also drive revenue and all those things that have to happen. It wasn't just playtime. It was that in concert with the experience of helping people do their craft, helping people know that this artistry was out there. And it was halcyon days for sure. And I had
Yeah.
that experience too as a college rep. So being able to pass that on over the lifetime of my career is the biggest delight, honestly.
Mm.
It was
Mm.
bringing in more college reps as
Yeah.
I graduated through my tenure too. So
Yeah.
you're welcome,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for saying yes.
Of course, of course.
Mhm.
And so to set the stage, I guess, we have so much to talk about, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that you're here.
Mhm.
But could you start off by just providing a little bit of intro to who you are?
Yeah.
Because you wear so many different hats.
Um, I I on one hand am a huge music fan,
Hmm.
as yourself. That's what led me to music. When I was really young, I started writing a little fanzine. Before there were blogs, there were fanzines on paper.
Hmm.
And one of those, I just went around, and a lot of my friends at that particular time in school were artists and musicians. And
Mm.
I come from a family that's very steeped in entertainment. And so that was normal for me to be, either on film sets or in studios with artists and that sort of thing. So I just started writing about the bands that I liked and whether or not I had been able to see them live, or I just heard about them and I was a big record shopper.
Mm.
I get that from my dad.
Hmm.
And so music was a really powerful influence in my life, and I just decided I always like drew and took pictures and wrote, so I decided to put it all together in a fanzine, and that fanzine got picked up by first a few local papers and then a few local magazines, and then those magazines started looking at what was going on regionally, and then it got picked up by like sort of the eastern seaboard of magazines and journals, and then that allowed me
Wow.
to actually have the experience that I sort of had when I got to be college rep, but before that, to be the sort of roving reporter to go meet
Wow.
up with a band. And this was a time which was exciting for me too, because most of the time I would not have been allowed to even see these bands because they were playing in tiny clubs and I was well underaged, but my dad would take me and I would, knock on the backstage door and they would be like, "Yeah, this is the kid that's going to interview you." And I'd ask my little questions, have the little camera, put it all
Mm.
together when I got back and started that way. And then
Mm.
when I was in college, the college marketing team contacted me at BMG and said, "Hey, we have this internship program." And I said, "Yes, totally
Hmm.
interested." So
Hmm.
that's the way it started. And then I just kind of worked my way up from college rep to field marketing rep to sales rep to marketing director to all the other things that I started to do. So yeah, it was great.
Wow, that is amazing. I did not know that you did all that before you got the internship, and that also
Mhm,
your family came from, or you had this family background
mhm,
that you were kind of
mhm. Yeah,
into the
yeah.
art from a
Yeah,
young
my
age.
mom started a nonprofit for artists.
Oh, wow.
When I was young, she saw the need for, artists to have artist in residency kind of programs, to have healthcare taken care of them or sponsored by different groups, to have exchanges. So my
Hmm.
house was always full of like traveling artists, no matter what their medium was, because we turned into kind of the host family for a lot of those. And then my dad's been in film since he was about 12 years old. So
Wow.
he's been all over the place and he's a professor of film. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
What I think is so cool when I hear about that is just contrast to my experience is that you grew up in this world where it was just that experience of an artist, whether in
Mhm,
music or in film or other art, it's all normal, and you
mhm,
see these people doing it as their
mhm,
life, as their livelihood, and for me, growing up, like my parents did not do that. We came from such a different background,
mhm.
and for me, that was like I was like trying to figure out how is this? How can this be
Right.
um, a career of
Mhm.
livelihood? Because it certainly doesn't seem like it can be because I don't see that modeled out, right? So
Right.
it's
Right. Mhm,
really interesting to contrast it because you hear so much like the representation or just seeing it makes you believe it, right?
mhm,
So I that's one thing I picked up on. Another thing that I picked up on as you were recounting your experience is that very early on, you discovered the importance, whether you knew it was
Mhm,
important or not, but the
mhm.
importance of writing and getting your
Yes,
voice out there. And
right.
you had this fanzine, and
Mhm,
you don't think about it in that way back then, probably, but that was a voice that you had that you could authoritatively or officially
mhm,
write about something that you loved and discuss it in the
mhm,
open. And I think that is so important nowadays too, because we take it for granted. Because now anyone can just go on Twitter and do something.
mhm.
But
Yeah,
for what you were doing, there was research and
right.
time and
Mhm.
putting that together and then getting it out there in the world.
I think I owe that to my parents. I have a brother, now, but I kind of grew up a little bit as an only child, so I think with them being so busy and everything that they were doing, it was always like, how can we entertain her?" So, whether it was my dad saying, "Hey, here's a camera. Let's why don't we do some stop motion photography? That'll take you for a little while to get that
Hmm.
done," or, here's some pad and paper, draw something, write something, tell me kind of a story about the record that you're listening to or whatever. That's
Mm.
really how that started. And I would go around with my dad quite a bit whenever he was working or teaching, because he's a filmmaker and a film professor. And so I got to see all of, like you're saying, I got to see all this stuff kind of stuff in action. And I played, instruments too. But I do have a brother who is a professional violinist, so he had this sort of similar experience with, growing up around music and art and everything, and just knowing that anybody's artistic, really.
Hmm.
It's more like not anybody's artistic, it's everybody's artistic. It's just taking
Hmm.
the time to explore it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, we all have that potential. It's whether or not
Mhm.
you nurture it
Yeah,
and what you do with it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, and so a little bit back to BMG. So,
Mhm,
you started, and it seemed like that was, you rose up and you were with the company for so long. And
mhm,
nowadays, when we talk about BMG, like in this moment, if anyone is listening and if anyone is not steeped in the record, in the
mhm,
music world, they might
mhm.
be like, oh, what is that? And
Yeah.
BMG was like this, infamously known for like the BMG, like kind of like they have these discount catalogs, right? Like you get
Right.
12 CDs for like a
Mhm,
cent. Like, so
mhm.
people might not know what it is, but can you talk a little bit about what BMG was, the
Right.
importance of it, and then also like your function
Sure,
and
yeah.
what you were
So,
doing?
like all of us when we first probably heard about BMG, it was the BMG Music Club, and it was that, that entity that you bought records or CDs from. But we were on the other side of that. That was one side of the house, and BMG at the time owned Random, Doubleday, and Dell as well for, publishing, books and
Hmm.
all sorts. It's a German company called Bertelsmann Music Group at that time, and we owned, several different entities and worked with a bunch of different labels. So those labels are like RCA, Arista, RCA Victor, Wyndham Hill, bunch of different ones, but also had relationships with Rough Trade and, Dedicated and a bunch of UK indie labels and, Network, a bunch of different things. And if you look now, if you like Wikipedia any major distribution company, you see a bouncing ball when you're following like what label was under what distribution company. It really depended upon what time you're
Hmm.
looking at. But we had all kinds of amazing artists like, Foo Fighters and Eve Six and Dave Matthews and Sarah McLachlan and,
Hmm.
the Libertines and, all kinds. So we worked cross genre. There were a lot of artists. And I started, like I said, off as a college rep. And then by the end of my stint there, uh, somebody decided I could be in charge of the San Francisco and Seattle branches. So there were branches in each of the different regions across the country. And we all had an amazing time kind of going through that process, because when we were college reps, it was almost like having a sorority or fraternity of comrades, and we all
Mhm.
kind of grew up through the industry together. And we would do things like do promotions around releases. Sometimes we were lucky and got to have our hands in at the beginning of an artist's career and,
Mhm.
help 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 the process of how they were going to be branded and marketed and um, all of that stuff. So it's great.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's great. And can you talk a little bit about the relationships that you formed, whether
Yeah.
it's like professional relationships or relationships like you mentioned, how you were able to identify artists
Mhm.
and work with them early on in their career and then kind of help them grow their relationships. Can you talk maybe just a
Yeah.
little bit about that and how, I guess, I guess what I wanted to hear is that, in a business type of relationship, I
Mhm.
think that might be more codified or
Yeah.
more widely discussed. But a
Mhm.
relationship that's more a balance of
Mhm.
creativity,
Yeah.
um,
I think
may
I
be
think
different.
yeah, I think one of the things that we were lucky to be able to experience too, because um, a lot of us, almost all of us that worked at these, and this is not just, about what happened at BMG or Sony, or even when I was an assistant before I got signed on as a college rep for BMG. I was actually a marketing rep for a little bit at Polygram,
Mm,
BGG at the time. But no matter where you were at that time, um, you were able to let your curiosity propel your interaction with the artist.
mm,
So one of the things that we did was definitely, know the artist. Really get to know where their songs came from, what they were thinking about, um, what mattered to them. Uh, that was a lot of what was important, and just be treating the music as you would take the music to your best friend who hadn't heard it yet,
mhm,
and hope that they would love it.
mhm,
And then it was that whole process of, this is someone's art. Yes, it's commerce, because they're not just expecting to just play music and there it ends. But at the same time, we were always told and believed that you're dealing with somebody's sort of life's work in your hands. You know, they may have many different variations of that, but be mindful about it and, nurture that exposure to other people that can help them grow and just hear the music. So it could be something really simple, like, you're driving around and you realize the work that you've done is starting to resonate with people that you don't know.
mhm.
I remember the first time, you put out a record and no one really knew who the artist was. And then months later, you've made like a bumper sticker or something, and you're driving around in a random place and you're like, oh, they know
Yeah,
who that is. That's
yeah.
amazing. Or you first time you're in with an artist or something, and you hear themselves on, like
Mm,
a radio
mhm,
station, or they're doing an interview, and then people are calling in and saying all these magical things about how their music has affected their lives and stuff like that. So, yeah, that is the most rewarding part of the process. But there's a lot of trust that comes with that from different artists, and so a lot of these artists you might see in your market, several times a year, and then over the course of years, you know, they've grown from unknown to like mega star. And
mhm,
so keeping those conversations going and building that level of trust with each other, to know that you're not going to sacrifice some of the things that they want to do with their music,
mhm.
um, in your market, as much as you can manage that experience and let them be connected to the people that really believed in them.
Yeah.
Whether that was, um, independent record stores helping along the way. A lot of these artists would not have gotten
Mm,
where they were without those kinds of people and teams within the indie record stores really supporting what was going on and
mm.
believing in them.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think from what you said, that's so rich in what you just said. But one thing I want to emphasize is that one thing you mentioned is you mentioned that very simple act of wanting of what it is fundamentally is having a piece of art, a song, and then
Mhm,
wanting to share that with someone else
mhm.
and finding who those people are that you think would enjoy this thing that you also like, right? That
Yeah,
is like very much the fundamental. But when we think about like the music industry, that gets
mhm.
lost,
It does. It
right?
does. It
Or
does.
business in general, like as
Business,
you
right,
were talking
right.
about when you first started talking about that relationship, you were like, this is someone's life work, or this is someone's
Mhm,
hopes and dreams.
mhm.
And how do you transfer that hopes and dream into building this commerce that's
Yeah,
behind it, right?
mhm.
It's so
Right.
simple, that start, and so
Mhm,
pure, that
mhm,
start. And then there's all these things that have to go on behind the scenes
mhm.
or in planning
Yeah,
to get it to where it is. But I
yeah,
think a lot of that gets lost
it
in the
does.
shuffle in the conversation, right? You don't think about that that starting point, that origin.
Yeah, and so we always did a lot of things to make sure that we were connecting with the artists, from their arrival into our towns, that we were taking care of them and expressing to them, "Hey, you're about to meet this person, whether it's at this indie retail store or this radio station, college or major or otherwise. And this is what they do. And this is how they help you do what you're doing."
Hmm.
And, putting that together in a way that is very human and real, and
Hmm.
also letting them have these kinds of conversations, making the time so it's not just you're popping in, you're waving, saying hi, and then off you go to another place. It was building these friendships really with the different places and the people that you had to engage with.
Mm.
It was like, when you get a piece of music, whether it's a CD or a download or an LP or something, you take a piece of vinyl, you come home, you put it on the uh, record player, and you're just listening for the first time. And you're
Hmm.
like, wow, this is amazing. I got to call my friend, get them over here to sit and listen. That's the one thing that, you know, uh, growing up, we all did.
Mm.
We grabbed the record, put it on the player, turned the lights off, put the headphones on, laid on the floor, closed your eyes, and just listened to the
Mm.
music.
Mm.
And that's how you wanted to first experience the music. So taking that passion for that experience and never forgetting that that's where this whole thing starts. You
Hmm.
know, it comes with all the other layers. We don't live in fantasy land where that's all there is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's where it starts, and that's what you have to hold on to. And taking that personal uh, remembrance of that artistry first as you're going through all the different things that you have to do to make, the commerce chain run around it, because it is business at the end of music,
Hmm.
but not forgetting that there's, a person attached to that too.
Yeah. I think it's easily getting lost. And what you said, just this, these past few minutes of what you discussed, I think it's also really interesting in that when you take a step back, that is just how all business or all, kind of human interaction, that is like the core of it, like how you do
Mhm,
it well. But we oftentimes like to silo, like, oh, this is what you do when you are working with creatives or with
mhm,
art, and this
right,
is what you do when you do business. But it's all together.
right. Mhm,
It's really the same. Maybe the
mhm,
way you've described it sounds a little bit more creative, and
Mhm.
there's a ritual behind it, and there's a
Mhm.
heart behind it.
Mhm.
But that is very much any business, any product that you sell,
Mhm.
and the art is also a product too. So it goes
Yeah,
both ways.
it does, and I think you'd find if you looked through the roster of not only just artists, but people who were helping them along the way, most of those people do some kind of art too.
Hmm.
They they were musicians to a certain degree or, um, painters or sculptors or writers or, um, you know, knitters or crocheters or whatever, quilters even. So it just people who understand what it takes to have a vision and then put it out into the world and wanna share
Hmm.
that, that's where it all starts.
Yeah.
And keeping that in the focus, not in the rear view, but in the focus of what's in front of you, I think has helped,
Yeah.
artists all across the board in that way.
And you mentioned it, but I would like to hear you just talk about it a little bit more. But that balance between art and commerce,
Mhm.
what is your personal philosophy on it? Because you hear these debates. Sometimes people are
Right.
like, you're selling out, or you hear like the starving artist concept,
Mhm.
and neither one, I think, is extremes is great. But
Right.
how have you? What was your philosophy that helped guide you in your career?
Well, I think learning, by listening to whoever you're working with, in whatever capacity, um, you know, you realize where their focus is and where their motivation
Mm,
comes from. So that helps to get you in sync with what's going on with them and their need to nurture what they're doing and put it out into the world. And also to make revenue from that so that they
mhm.
can go and make more, you know? When I was a kid, all I wanted to do well, once I decided that I didn't wanna be a, marine biologist because there was too much math, you know? But, um, or own, like, a huge rescue horse ranch or something, and I didn't have space for it in the backyard, those sorts of things, there's only so much backyard, how many horses can you have back there? But, once I decided that this was the area that I was gonna work in, I really understood, I think, and kept learning and understanding that there's a whole lot of people that have to help an artist achieve, and that revolves around some commerce. It just kind of does.
Mhm.
And I think, like when you see a movie and all the credits run, you then see that
Mhm.
as something that tells you, wow, a lot of people are involved in this.
Mhm.
It doesn't come across so apparently in music because you just hear this piece of music and there's not really, I mean, sometimes there, depending upon the source, there might be an attached liner note section that shows you a handful of people
Mhm.
that are usually, just connected to the recording of that or the artwork that you're seeing as accompanying it and the people who are writing it, putting it together. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a studio credit,
Yeah.
hopefully, something like that. But you never see the masses of people that are working on this project together. So,
Mhm.
one, it's highly collaborative. Two, it does need to be fed because there's a lot involved in it, you
Mhm.
know? Um, there probably is nearly as many people working on getting a piece of music out into the world as there is when you're talking about delivering a movie and then
Mhm.
seeing all those people as the credits run or animators or whatever it is,
Yeah.
there's a laundry list. So,
Mhm.
um, it's important to acknowledge that that has to basically happen on some level
Mhm.
in order to connect it to getting your music out into the world so that people can support it. And also, like any artist, I think every artist who's ever made anything um, will reach a point where a friend, maybe your mom, maybe your family will come to you and say, "Oh, that's beautiful. Can I have
Mm,
that?"
mhm,
And you're like, "Well, yeah, you can, but I was kind of going to sell it because rent, you know, things, gas for the car, all these things are, but no, just take it." And then
mhm,
at some point, somebody comes along in their life and says, you know, you're making that to sell it. So
mhm,
you have to sell it. It's not
mhm,
selling out to sell what you're putting in the world
mhm,
as art. Um, I remember an artist told me once that he was quite accused at one point in his career of selling out because
mhm,
they let, a commercial that
mhm,
they wouldn't ordinarily have thought, they would
mhm,
ever do a commercial for this particular thing. And then he said, "But you know what? That just lets me do more art, and it lets me
mhm,
sponsor more artists, and it lets
mhm,
me do all these different things." So I was like, "Yeah, when I was a kid, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a patron of the arts."
mhm,
Probably because my parents were heavily involved in art and sustainability of that art and making it
mm.
accessible.
Yeah,
Um, and that was way before things like Patreon, but now we have that as a
yeah,
platform that we can all kind of share in and promote and all the different resources to fund things. It's good.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah. It's the narrative that the media likes to place. But yeah, I think those in the industry, I think most of
Mhm,
the time we know the
mhm,
difference, right, and the
mhm.
necessity of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and one thing I also wanted you to touch upon, because I think from the very early days that I got to know you, just your expansive knowledge of all these different cultures,
Mm, mhm,
and especially specifically, like the most memorable one to me is like your understanding of like the British or like the Anglophile type of thing. That really left an impression on me for some reason, and probably because like I didn't know much about Europe at the time,
mhm,
and you're one of the few people that talked about it.
mhm,
But I knew you were like so steep, like you had this to me,
mhm,
like this depth and
mhm,
knowledge of the culture, of the music, of the
mhm,
fashion,
mhm.
of the intricacies of it.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like where you got that? And
Um,
did you see that it was anything special?
oh, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it came from first, first influence my parents' record collections, and then just we traveled a lot when I was a kid.
Mm,
Um, always, especially during the summers. Um, my dad might be making a film or doing something, and we would all go off
mm.
and travel um, and see different things. I had a passport at a very young age, and for anybody watching, get your passport. Get your
Yes,
passport, see the world.
that's right.
Um, and it was a really fortunate uh, um, byproduct of what my parents were doing that let us go to an awful lot of places and kind of be this global citizen. And for England and Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and that area of music, probably because my parents were, heavy into the 60s sort of
Mhm,
um, scene where music was coming from. Those were some of the records that I listened to as a kid, Beatles and Kinks and all of those different bands, Thin Lizzy, and all of those different bands I grew up listening to. And then the sort of Britpop scene that came around in the 80s and the 90s, that was part of, the stuff that I then got to listen to. And then some of it later I got to even work on, which was
mhm,
amazing. But yeah, it's just my love of history as well. And um, just being exposed to the different culture, I went to high school for a little tiny bit on an exchange in Germany. Um,
Mhm.
you know, and we just traveled. We traveled all around Europe. We traveled all around UK and Ireland when I was a kid, and I've been back as often as I possibly can
Mhm.
ever since. So yeah, diving into that, it's more just thinking about music as having like a family tree.
Mm.
And one of the things that we did when I was a college rep was to get people to understand and be
Mm.
exposed to music was identifying, if you like this, you might like that, and
Mm.
here's how they're connected kind of on a family tree. And,
Mhm.
that's kind of how
Mm.
that connection came back in, and then, of course, um, I'm a period piece kinda girl. I love those things and, Jane Austen and everybody else, get in line. Um, but it's knowing the history of things, whether it's music or film or anything, that makes you kinda dive more deeply into a culture. Whenever I see anything, or hear where a band is from, like if they're from, like, Iceland, then all of a sudden
Mhm.
what do I where are you from? What's going
Yeah.
on? What informs your art? So I wanna learn about it, or, you know, Norway or any other place that is kind of off the beaten path. Um, you find out about the music, then you find out about the culture, then you find out about, um, the history, and then hopefully you get to go there either physically or virtually or however, and you
Mhm.
just soak it all up and pass it on because usually you're like, "Wow, this is amazing. Did you know this about,
Yeah.
a place or a band or the combination?"
I like the analogy you mentioned about family trees
Mhm,
because that is what it is.
mhm,
That is
mhm,
important. That does kind of get people to discover or um, appreciate more music and
mhm,
to be even bigger fanatics and
mhm.
fans about it. But nowadays, when you talk about it, because nowadays we consume music so differently through like
Yeah,
Spotify or Apple Music.
that's
Now it's
true.
all they phrase it around algorithms or the
Mm,
data. And you're like,
mhm.
well, where does that data and algorithm, what is that? What drives that, right? It's
Right.
this
Mhm,
concept that you talked about of family
mhm,
trees, of the
mhm.
history, but
Yeah,
that is totally lost now,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
That's not
mhm.
discussed. So it's unfortunate. So I love that you bring it back there and
Oh,
hopefully
I still
people
do.
recognize that
Yeah.
importance.
I
Yeah.
still do when somebody says, "Oh, here's a new band," or whatever. I'm like, "Oh," 'cause, what you normally do is just associate them with somebody else that you like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll go, "Oh, well, that sounds like this," and somebody might go, "Who are they?" And then you go, "Oh, good opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to tell you more about, this kind of sound that
Yeah.
came from other people." Because we're all just kind of discovering the same things, just as with a fresh perspective. There's only so many notes, right?
Yeah.
Just putting
Yeah.
them together in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm,
Yep.
mhm,
And you've already discussed many times like this link between music and film, and you, I guess, grew up with that in your
mhm.
family because your
Yeah,
father did film,
mhm,
um,
yeah.
and what does that mean to you? Do you have any favorite
Oh,
memories of
oh, yeah,
that connection
yeah,
between film and music?
yeah, so my dad's a teacher of film, and he's also a filmmaker, and so, when working with his students, they'd make these small, tiny little films, and they'd always want to have, like, a soundtrack or something backing them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, they would
Of
get, like,
course.
local musicians or somebody to make a track for their film, or sometimes they'd right away and get licensing to put music in their movies or whatever was going on, so there was always that unification for me growing up that you needed to have music attached to any kind of visual. And since I come from filmmaking uh, parent, that was always really went sort of hand in hand. And I remember way before even being a college rep, going to like South by Southwest with my dad, or
Mm-hmm.
some of the indie things like Sundance and stuff like that, and
Mm,
seeing how people were scouting for different participation with partnerships in music and film. And so they always kind of were,
mm,
knitted together in a way. And you just sort of saw that as a collective experience because you had, this bevy of artists, whether they were filmmakers or musicians or, you know, any kind of artist, because they, were staging the sets or they're doing all this different stuff, or, whatever's going on. It was like kind of the marriage of all of these creative people coming together to make this one entity to present to the world at large. And yeah, so I've always had that connection. One of my favorite memories probably was seeing, you know, um, the development of, a storyboard come to life in a
mm,
short film,
mm,
and then having someone who was a film student, but also I think they were pretty sure they were a cello player, and they
mm,
were one of my dad's students, and practicing their cello in between classes. And then I remember one of my dad's students running down the hall going, "Who is playing that?" And then they put that piece of music into 30 or 40 seconds of the little 8-minute film they were making. And that's when I was really small when that happened. I think we were in Wisconsin. And I remember that clicking. Wow. So it's not always all thought out. Like sometimes
mm,
there's spontaneity to what happens.
mm.
Like if you're, in the right place and something fortuitous happens, you can connect that to the art that you're making, and it pulls other people into that whole process. And
Yeah.
I think that collaboration, and knowing that collaboration can come when it's really highly orchestrated, or it can happen on the fly, was just, yeah, that
Mm,
was inspiring to me.
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I love these stories that you're sharing because nowadays we're all about like this, like whether it's on TikTok, like,
Mhm.
or we're on Spotify, or
Mhm.
just moving about the world.
Mhm.
Everything is like so quick,
Mhm.
so sanitized,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
so like kind of like get the views out there. And the
Right.
way that you're talking about it is like much more human, much
Mhm.
more of a discovery, much
Mhm.
more of a ritual, much more of
Yeah.
a process, and more story
Yeah.
focused to me. Like
Yeah.
all these things that you're talking about, not just a story in the actual product, but also
Mhm.
there's a story behind how it's made and kind of an
Mhm.
unveiling of the behind the scenes and all that process. I think that's so lovely to hear. And hopefully people get that sense when they're listening to this.
Yeah.
Can you share some of your like? Do you have any favorite like films that have
Mm.
great soundtracks or music movies or
Mhm.
anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's so many, I don't even know where to start, but, you know, uh, I remember when the Garden State soundtrack came out and how
Mm-hmm.
that was like an awesome pairing of music and the movie and the subject matter, and it just kinda all went together really well. Um, About a Boy, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm, yeah.
Valley John Boy, that was amazing. Um,
Mm.
let's see. I don't know, there's so many,
I
but
love that you mentioned those because those are not ones that I would think of. So I like to I like
ooh,
that there was
mhm,
there's
mhm,
differences. 'Cause I think of
yeah,
like maybe like Back to the Future,
yeah,
or
mhm,
like something like that.
yeah,
Or a
yeah,
lot of animated films are very
mhm,
good at
yeah,
that.
it's true, and
Yeah.
I mean, I love the fact that you can, look them up more easily these days to find out who
Mhm.
that music was, or just point your phone, or, do that kind of stuff, because I think that helps with uh, getting people familiar with new artists or just older artists they've never heard before.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's great. I mean, I don't know, there's so many. I don't know where to start.
Yeah, there's a word out there of
Mhm,
discovery.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and we've alluded to this, but given that there's been so much change in the entertainment industry, both in film and music, but I think in music has, it seems to me, was not only factually impacted first, but
Yeah.
also probably has had the biggest change. Like the model
Mhm,
today seems so unrecognizable
mhm.
um,
Yeah, it's true.
to like 10, 20 years ago. Um, how do you, what do you think about that in the current world that we're in, both the pros and the cons?
Well, I think the pros are is that there's so much more accessibility for people to have discovery of music, because it's everywhere. It always was everywhere, but having most people have, a phone in their pocket. I mean, yes, we had iPods, but that was you listening to your own stuff
Hmm.
more than sharing it. I mean, we did have people making playlists for us and exchanging those, but it was a different kind of reality
Hmm.
than the streaming services that are coming onto your phone, or that kind of collection that you might have in your music locker or whatever. But I think the pros of that are you can look something up right in your hands and then go to play it almost immediately. The cons of that are you don't have the deeper kind of discovery point,
Yeah.
and you don't have someone curating and architecting that path that leads you down that road, that has the tree of how things come together and different artists that you might like.
Hmm.
And without that human element attached to it as somebody like, leading you through the process, I think you miss a lot. Um,
Hmm.
and the texture of your education in music isn't as vast or deep unless you do the deep diving yourself.
Hmm.
And everybody of a certain age remembers, now this doesn't happen anymore, but remembers, sneaking into their brother's record collection or their parents' record collection or their sister's record collection,
Hmm.
and going, oh, I need to check out this, and then you hear a scream from the other room, where's Led Zeppelin 4? And you're like, I don't know, I don't have it, or whatever the record is. um, and trying to slide it back into the case and put it right back so that the prying eyes that come in later are like, was this moved? But that sort of thing. But at the same time, though, times roll ahead, and there's just more opportunity, I think, though, too. The barriers to entry to create music
Hmm.
being really leveled
Yeah.
is amazing, because then you have the availability to hear more and be a part of that creative cycle with people that are just making things in their living room, or whatever's going on, and you can have that exposure. um,
Hmm.
and as a musician, you can grow an audience a lot faster, and you don't need necessarily the big machine behind you to reach your audience, and that's a beautiful thing for
Hmm.
sure. Mhm. Makes a lot of
Right.
difference. That's the win-win upside.
Yeah. Well, it sounds very complex and multi-layered because in what you
Mhm,
said there, there's like the pros and cons kind of they flow back and forth. Like
mhm.
it's just
Yeah.
different now.
Yeah, it's
Um,
just different.
like super different. And
Mhm.
I think we can sit here and say, oh no, remember those good old
Mhm.
days. But
Right.
you just sound old.
Right.
And like you said, there's
Right.
also really interesting things
Mhm.
about the current structure.
Yeah,
Um,
and you've got great, uh, radio stations that are online like KXP and others, and you can listen to music from all over the world at any time. Um, and it's easily accessible for music
mhm,
discovery. I think that's amazing. Um, but yeah, you just want to support the artists, though, and all the other people that are getting that music to you in any way by
yeah.
helping them have a living so that they
Yeah.
can create this. Because if you're in survival mode, you can't be as artistic,
Yeah.
because you don't have time. You're worried about basic things. So,
Exactly.
you
Yep.
know, it's important.
Totally. And one thing we were discussing and just chatting about before we hit record is just you were talking about just the impact that
Mm.
film or music has on people, right?
Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit about that? Just the
Yeah.
impact to culture or to humanity of this thing that we do that most people think it's just like we're frolicking, like we're having
Yeah.
fun. It's not
Mhm.
a serious thing,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, talk a little bit about the impact
Well, I think
that
the
you see.
impact, the impact of music and film is immeasurable. You can always change the mood or the atmosphere of wherever you are with a piece of music, or spending
Mm,
5 minutes watching, something visually. Whether, you're having a bad day, or you need to get excited for something because you're going to do whatever that is, and you want to, get yourself all pumped up. You can listen to a piece of music, or watch a particular section of a movie, or, you know, cheer yourself up or cheer someone else up, or, express yourself, in any way that you need to or want to.
hmm
And that the influence of those two mediums are exceptionally powerful. Um, and I don't know how we would do life without either one of them, to be
hmm
honest. You know, it's such an integral part of humanity to have those two expression points, I think. I don't know anyone that doesn't enjoy either one of those things on a daily basis.
hmm
It's just such a part of the human experience to weave music and movies into your life. And I don't know how you could really walk around and not be exposed to it, even if you weren't doing that. It's like, can you take a walk around your neighborhood and not even hear, somebody playing some music in a car, or, seeing some advertisement for something, that points you back to, what to watch tonight, or,
hmm
on your phone or something. There's always that sort of reiteration of those mediums as being, integral to our human experience, and they're a connectivity tool. I think that's the thing that helps cross boundaries and perceived borders on cultural integration and collaboration. And I've learned so much about all kinds of places around the globe just based on hearing some music or seeing some film by, a different director, or subject matter in the film, or music from the film, or, any of that. Uh, I think it's a magical experience to take on film and music, and putting them together
hmm
is probably like one of the best jobs you could have.
Yeah. When you were just saying this, one thing that popped into my head was um, I'm not the biggest fan of this, but I do appreciate some parts of it, which is K-pop.
Oh
And
yeah.
the
Mhm,
stories that I love most
mhm,
about K-pop
mhm,
are like, this K-pop fandom that is
mhm,
global, and how they
mhm,
stick together, and
mhm,
how they have their very strong opinions
mhm,
about certain things.
mhm.
Um, do you see any parallel from K-pop to any of the movements prior to that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think, you could go back to any kind of movement, like the 60s mod scene,
Mm,
and the mods and the rockers and whoever else were around, the skiffle bands of days of old, to like you know, the DC punk movement versus the LA punk movement to,
Mm,
the different rap scenes across the
mm,
country, um, and then the sort of hieroglyphics rappers compared to the other rappers. And, everybody has their, their different buckets, Britpop, the Manchester scene, or whatever. Everybody, you know, kind of comes together to rally around a certain sound and messengers of that sound,
mm,
kind of create this tribal kind of culture that
mm,
exists within a community that supports a different kind of sound or vibe, or even down to like costuming and what you're wearing and
mhm,
what color your hair is, or how short or long your hair is, or whatever's going on with that, in tandem, I think
mm,
is yeah. And I think it's awesome that there's a K-pop movement.
mhm.
Kids can get together. Even kids. I have a colleague that I work with, and she is much older than the average K-pop fan, and she is 1000% into it. And
Mhm.
it's very awesome because every time she's on a
Yeah,
Zoom call, I'm like, "What's that behind your head? What band is that?" And she'll go on and on about the K-pop band that's behind her head. It's awesome.
yeah,
It's intergenerational. Music is intergenerational. Films are intergenerational, and I love that.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
sure. Do you have any current music or film discoveries that you don't that you would recommend to folks that you've discovered
Okay.
recently, or something that you really love that you don't think people know about enough?
Um, hmm, that's a good question. Um, I right now I'm just not really listening to a ton of music that's
Mm,
new.
mm,
I have gone back to older things.
mm,
I think it's because maybe the state of our universe,
mhm,
finding comfort and rediscovering older things that I love. Um,
mhm.
yeah, I'm not really on the
What's on
cutting.
your rotation mainly now?
There's a band that I was lucky enough to get to work with, and they became friends of mine, called Delays, and
Mhm,
they have a record called Faded Seaside Glamour. And if
mm,
you haven't heard of them, you should check them out. They're amazing.
mhm,
Um, I have gone back to a local band called Visqueen,
mm,
and they're pretty amazing too. And then I've just gone back to a lot of the like classic rock and roll stuff, like
mm,
the Pretenders and
mhm,
Psychedelic Furs. And
mhm,
although Psychedelic Furs have a new record, and you should check that out if you haven't. It's their
mm.
first record in like a long, long time.
I did not know. I'll
Um,
check that out, yeah.
yeah. And just listening to things that kind of bring familiarity and comfort right now, and maybe it's because the
Yeah.
world seems a little upside down.
Mhm.
Um, I've been
Totally.
doing more of that, but then I think I've been probably consuming a little bit more uh, television-related media.
Mhm.
I channeled my inner 14-year-old and I watched The Discovery of Witches um, on Sundance Now. It's really fun, you
Ah.
guys. If you just need like a
Oh.
little fun ride and you're into vampires and witches
Yeah,
and
that sounds
that sort
cool.
of stuff, is kind of fun. You'll learn some history too. They go back to like, I don't know, 1600s in England for a little while, and that's fun. Well,
Mhm.
it wasn't fun then, but there was a lot going on.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we're all, I don't know about everyone, but I'm in a place where that kind of comfort in what I mean, I'm in music right now is kind of where I'm gravitating to, but I'm watching more things that I'm unaware of.
Mm.
Um, you know, I was the last person probably on the planet to start, exploring that series on PBS called Finding Your Roots. That was just
Mm.
a little binge things that I've been doing to escape from work and, watch something but kind of learn something too, because they
Yeah.
touch a lot of historical stuff. And it also, it's kind of timely because it shows you that humanity is linked to each other,
For sure.
so people go back and find out, where their great great grandparents came from, and then they do some DNA testing when the paper trail runs out, and then they find out that that all of these random people are cousins, and
Mm.
it's cute. It's good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
History is cool.
Yeah.
Um, and this is a question that I like to ask because I don't think it's talked about enough. But I
Mhm.
ask all the folks that come on the podcast is what's
Mhm.
something that you do for self care?
Oh, okay. Um, I take time out. I mean, sometimes, life just gets a little up around your chin.
Hmm.
So for me, it's besides, trying to, of course, drink enough water, take
Hmm.
your vitamins, eat green things, get some exercise, talk to your friends, do
Yeah.
all of those sorts of things. Um, you know, uh, spa treatments, all that sort of stuff. But but also, oh, and definitely, hug your pets,
Yeah.
and your kids if you have those. But besides that, I take 2 weekend days. They usually wind up being a Sunday, but you could do them in any day.
Mm.
Um, and I don't touch any form of technology.
Really?
Mhm. I go analog.
How do you do
For
that?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Especially working in digital, how do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I put the phone I'm very short. So, as a little person, it's kind of an effort to put your phone on top of the fridge, but I
Okay.
do that. Not in the fridge, that
Right.
might be bad,
Right.
but I put it on top of the fridge so that I can't really look at it every few minutes or every hour on the hour. Now, you wanna make sure that some of your settings are listed so
Yeah.
that you can hear it if, there's been an
Right.
accident, you need to pay attention, but
Yeah.
that's rarely gonna happen, we hope.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
put the phone someplace where it's difficult to get to,
Mm.
and for 12 hours after waking, sleep time doesn't count. 12 hours after waking, I don't look at any screens. So that gives me a chance to actually read or paint or sew or knit or do something else or hang out with the dogs or do something in a garden or take a really long walk or a hike somewhere or something
Mm.
to reset your mind and to rest your mind from all of the driving conversation that we always have,
Yeah.
because it's in our phone, it's on our phone, or we're watching something or whatever's going on, and it just kind of helps kind of quiet that space, because I think we just need that kind of time
Hmm.
to, to rest and reconnect with life outside of information constantly coming in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really cool
Yeah.
and
And I started
sounds.
doing that about 35 years ago. Yeah.
And so, wait, how often do you do this? You do it twice a month?
Twice
Is
a
that what you
month.
said?
Twice a month for 12 hours of waking
Okay.
time. So
Yeah.
24 hours a month waking
Yeah.
time, but it usually happens on like a weekend day because,
Yeah.
you can kind of get away with it
Right.
on a weekend. But yeah,
Oh,
it's really nice.
that sounds magical.
And sometimes you do get like, "Oh, I really want to check on this thing," and you're just like, okay, we'll write it down, you know. And the act of writing it down isn't just so that you don't forget, although that's handy if you need that, but it's
Yeah.
really writing it down so that you see what you thought was really important
Mm.
compared to what you did today that had nothing to do with technology,
Yeah.
and taking a chance, reconnecting yourself with nature and the world around you, and stopping for a minute.
Yeah.
You can still read. It just needs to be, not on a screen,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just helps me reset for the week ahead or whatever's going on.
Cool. I really
Yeah.
like that because there's so much going on these
Mhm,
days,
mhm.
right?
Yeah,
So it's so important to do that, and I love that you um, do that, and that it sounds actually doable. And
it is
now that
doable.
that that,
Mhm,
that now that you mention it, but
mhm.
when you
Yeah.
first suggested it, I thought it sounds crazy.
Right. What do you mean? No,
Yeah.
and I gradually waded into doing this, although there was some part of me that's done this since I was really small,
Hmm.
where I would, I had, really bad allergies and stuff when I was a kid, still kind of do. But
Mm.
in the summertime, sometimes, or the spring, pollen was super, super thick. And I wasn't allowed to go outside, ride my bike or my skateboard with my friends or do all this stuff because I would just wind up having like an asthma attack or something. And that would be bad for everybody. And so we would have what my dad said were like days on the island. So
Mm.
the island is your bed. And
Mm.
then you could have, your paint set, your books, whatever, all around you to entertain yourself. But you would, just kind of have to stay on the island for a few hours, just, pollen settled, and then you could go back outside and play. And so over time in life, I kind of took that with me, especially when work would get so manic. And at one
Yeah.
point I had like 3 cell phones and all kinds of responsibilities and people
Yeah.
calling all the time and needing stuff and working with a lot of e-commerce and online partners, and nothing ever stops in the
Hmm.
digital space.
Yep.
So then I was like, I think I need a day on the island. And
Hmm.
that's when I started to do it. And I was like, first it was just like 6 hours. And then I kind of gradually built it up to 12 hours. Sometimes it's been 24 hours twice a month.
Yeah.
Times are rare these days.
Right.
It's just nice to do it. And then, escaping out into the wilderness, if you can do that too. I used to go to this hiking resort where there were no phones and no cell service. And I
Oh
would
my gosh.
retreat there for
Right.
3 to 5 days. And
Mm.
it's in the only rainforest that we have in the US, and then the Olympic Peninsula. And you just go there, and all you do is hike all day and come back to the lodge and eat like really amazing home cooked veggies and everything. And then go to sleep and do it again the next day. And you do that for about 3 days. And
What's
you're
this
just
place called?
like, Lake Quinault.
Okay,
Lake
I'll have to
Quinault.
look it up.
Yeah, Lake Quinault
Sounds it
Lodge is
sounds it sounds fabulous.
it is fabulous. And the first time I went, I was like, well, this sounds fabulous. But then you get back from your hike and you're like, wait, where's my phone doesn't work. Where's the
Yeah,
internet? There's no internet.
yeah,
There's no
withdrawal.
you can't even watch a movie. And
Uh-huh.
then you start to complain about it, but because you've been out hiking all day, you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. And you look at your clock and your watch or whatever, and you're like, it's 8:15. I could totally go to sleep. So
Mhm.
you get the sleep benefit, the exercise benefit, the fresh air benefit.
Yeah,
Can't beat it.
I love that. I think I need that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, there's so much more that we can discuss, so I'll have to have you on again. But
Would love
thank
to.
you so much for taking time. We're doing this on a Sunday, so thank you so much for taking an hour and a half on your Sunday.
Thank you.
Please go and relax, enjoy the rest of your day, and
Thank you so
I've
much.
I've, I've obviously violated your technology for this 12-hour period.
No, this is not one of those days. It's next week. We're all good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you,
So
Jason.
nice to connect with you. Stay well, stay
Yeah.
healthy, and I hope we can see each other soon
Yes.
when the world starts traveling again.
I'd love that. Thank you so
Okay.
much for having me. It's been an honor. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Christina.
All right. Bye.
Bye.